Great songs, very uplifting. And as a matter of fact, we're going to study about the Lord of Lords and the King of Kings right here. If you will, open your copy of God's Word to Matthew chapter 12. We'll continue our study there. Matthew chapter 12, verse 1. And that we finished up chapter 11 last week. Just a quick review. The Jewish leaders demonstrated in that chapter a determination to reject Christ or Jesus as their Messiah, in spite of all the evidence provided. And there'll be more conflict between Christ and the religious leaders. In chapter 12, there'll be more evidence given that He is the Christ, undeniable, undisputable evidence. And it's
Remember the punishment that Christ gave to the leaders of the Jews? Because they refused to accept Him?
what are you talking about?
Because the Jewish leaders refused to accept Christ as a Messiah. He said because of that, Israel will be in war forever.
Well, he's gonna get to the end of this right here. We're gonna talk about their hard hearts and the consequences of hard hearts. But this is a great story, and it's very good to study. But it's not just a story for us to put down the Jews, is it? It's a story.
Anyone who puts down God.
It's a story for us to be careful in our life, right? And make application to our life. Do not reject Jesus. And I love to study about that. Just a little bit of background on the Sabbath. We're going to start off here in chapter 12. It's going to have a couple things. It may be 2 Sabbath days. I think some writer says it is, but it's going to be a contrast or a conflict with the Jewish leaders about what Christ and His disciples are doing on the Sabbath day. And the second one's going to be another miracle on the Sabbath day that Christ did. Let's read. We'll read the first 9 verses, 1 through 9. The Jewish Pharisees, so to speak, they were so zealous for the Sabbath day that they had made they'd made their laws to keep from breaking Sabbath laws. And that's what Christ is going to rebuke them for. And that's what He's going to come in conflict with them, is about their laws that they had made. And we'll read later on in the book of Matthew, if we get that far, that they were teaching their laws as doctrine, as God's law, and it wasn't. It was their law, man's law, not God's. And we'll learn some more things about that. Let's read 1 verse each. Stephen, if you want to start us off, let's start with 1. Read through verse 9.
1 verse?
Yes, 1 verse each.
At that time, Jesus went through the grain fields of the Sabbath. His disciples were hungry, and they began to pluck heads of grain and to eat.
But when the Pharisees saw it, they said to Him, "Look, your disciples are doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath."
But He's done it to them. Have you not read what David did when he was at home? And they that were with him.
Now he entered into the house of God, and did eat the showbread in which was not lawful for him to eat, neither for them which were with him, but only for the priests.
Yes, I say to you that in that place there's one greater than the temple.
But if you had known what this meaneth, I would have mercy and not sacrifice. You not have condemned the guiltless.
For the Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath.
He went on from there and entered your synagogue.
All right. Was Jesus profaning the Sabbath by what him and his disciples did here?
Who wrote it?
That was Jewish law, wasn't it? Or the Pharisaic law, not God's law. It's one that they'd added.
Well, they had the law. Old Testament gives you the law. But
That's the law of
you
Moses.
just add it to it.
That's the law of Moses. This is addition that added to it. You're right. The law of Moses actually condoned this practice. You can read that in Deuteronomy chapter 23, verse 25.
It always gets, when they start saying you are speaking against the scriptures, and Jesus is the one.
And he says this in verse 3. He says, "Have you not read?" So there's a lesson from the Old Testament here, and he's going to teach it. How David did eat the showbread because he was hungry, and those that were with him. Now, was it lawful for David to do this?
Not to the laws that was added to it. But the scripture, I don't think he was.
It wasn't really, it wasn't for David. That was for the priest. It would, they would put it out, and after a period of time, the priest would, that was for them. So it wasn't really lawful, but it goes along with, I will have mercy and not sacrifice. David and his men were in need. They hungered, and that's all they had. And so it was allowed, and they revered David as a godly man, and so that's what he's reminding them of here.
He reminds them in verse 8 that who wrote the Sabbath?
He says, "I am Lord of the Sabbath."
I am the Lord of the Sabbath. I'm the one who wrote the law.
The Sabbath wasn't meant to be burdensome and bind heavy burdens on men. It was meant for a man to be able to rest on the seventh day from his labors and focus on God. What about verse 5? Or have you not read in the law, on the Sabbath days, the priest in the temple profane the Sabbath and are blameless? What's he talking about there?
They're working. That's their job.
They're working. They're not supposed to work on the Sabbath, though, right?
You know, my mom told me growing up to always get a job that I didn't have to work on Sunday. And then she said, and then you went and became a preacher and you're working every Sunday.
Yeah. It's the same today. And the preachers, that's the day they have to work. They prepare all week, maybe, but Sunday's the day that they have to present their lesson, their sermon. But it's necessary, isn't it? I mean, that's the way we worship. We want to hear God's word. We want to hear a lesson brought. Brother Andy does a great job from God's word, and that's when we come to hear. And we want to. That's important for us. So is what the priests were doing on the Sabbath day. It was necessary, and they were blameless. But they didn't consider that. But but Christ calls them on it. Verse 6. But I say unto you that in this place there is one greater than the temple. And that's him. That's and he'll go on further as we read to prove that. But if you had known what this meaneth, I will have mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the guiltless. That's actually a quote from Hosea, chapter 6, verse 6. And it's also one that he quotes again. It's just earlier in this book of Matthew, he's quoted already. This is the second time. Does anyone want to expound on what that means?
Where is it said in Matthew before this? Do you know? Do you have it on hand there?
Well, 9 and 13.
Okay. So it's a similar situation. I mean, it's different, but it's the same thing.
It's different but the same truth is being taught. God's here. He wants to relieve man of his sin burden. He wants to help man. He's not anything, and you can use that logic, and that's what he's saying here. You use logic. If it's not helping man, it's not godlike. Because that's what he is. He helps man. That's what he does.
In one place, the disciples are working according to the Jewish tradition about work. In the other place, he's eating with tax collectors and sinners. And in both places, the people were not being very compassionate toward those who were hungry or those who were needy or in need of something.
They just wanted to point fingers
Right,
and blame.
right.
Jake, you have something?
Oh, that's the whole point of the Sabbath man wasn't created for the Sabbath, but the Sabbath created for man, right? God rested on the seventh day. I get where it's a good idea that we don't work on the first day of the week, but it's almost like Christians pick that out of nowhere to be the Sabbath. I don't know where do we get that the first day of the week gets to be our new Sabbath. I get the disciples came together to break bread. But
Christ rose on the first day, I guess is.
Right, there's no place that tells us specifically to go to church on Sunday.
yeah,
But it does infer that because of the fact that that's what they did. We have their example of doing that, but we have no command specifically. I mean, there's the passage in Hebrews 10:25 that says, not forsaking assembling of yourselves together. But, and we know that they got together on the first day of the week, but there really, like, you're right, there really is no
and well, I mean,
comparison to the two.
yeah, we shouldn't forsake getting together, but like anybody saying you can't do work on Sunday unless it's the Lord's work or something like that. I just feel like the disciples would have been closer to taking their day of rest on the Sabbath and still coming together to meet on the first day of the week.
It said that.
As a Jew, they would.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
They kept up a lot of Jewish traditions.
it's also said that the Gentiles, when in their worship, they would have to meet at night because they had to work, and they would come together.
Yeah, it's almost like some people are making up more rules like the Pharisees were then to add to the Sabbath. A lot of folks are making up rules for our first day of the week.
Well, that is the teaching here, that we do not want to be Pharisees, and you know, we can be Pharisaical when we do that, and that is the point. The centerpiece of our worship is when we come together to take communion and remember the sacrifice that was made,
Well, it also says seek ye first.
the kingdom of
So
God.
it's first, and that's the first thing you're supposed to do. We seek him first, and then everything will fall in line.
Make our priorities right. So, you know, that's the reason, yeah, we don't want to add to, and that is true. And on this, I will have mercy and not sacrifice. Does that mean he don't want any sacrifice at this time? Is that what he's saying? Don't sacrifice to me? That's not what he's saying, is it?
Well,
The
this is-
sacrifice is important.
Yes, it is.
But
But it's
don't-
in reference to the fact that they were abusing their sacrifices, or they were not, they were doing their sacrifice. It'd be kind of like us coming to church on Sunday, but, when it comes to Saturday, we do whatever we want to do. We go, maybe during the week, we beat our spouses or our children or the dog or whatever, or we steal during the week, and then we come on Sunday and think that that's gonna make it all better.
And I think
And
that
that's what-
alludes
that's
to
what
what
they were
Jake's saying. If we're just coming to church so we can get a check by our name,
Right.
I'm here. That's not the reason. We're not doing what God wants us to do.
We will live a Christ-like life.
It's got to be, it's got to mean something. And it's not just a ritual, a religious ceremony that we're gonna go through so we can check a box. And that's what he's saying. I don't want that. I want mercy.
Through Spirit.
Well, then you've got that thing where you got some problem with your brother. You realize you've done your brother wrong. And you're at the point where you're gonna give your offering. He says, put your offering down, go get right with your brother, and then come and offer your offering. And the point behind that is, if you think you can be right with God without being right with your brother, forget it.
You got to have, like we mentioned earlier, you can't live any way you want during the week and then come Sunday to worship and think it's gonna be true worship. You need to live a godly life. And it's gotta be from our hearts. A love for God. And that's Numbers 15, we won't turn there and read, but there is a man that was caught gathering sticks on the Sabbath day. And he was put to death. They brought him to Moses, told him what he was doing, and they had the whole congregation pick up stones and stone him. But what they're doing here is he doesn't want it to be, it's not an arbitrary rule that somebody violates so somebody can die. That's not what he's talking about. He's talking about a flagrant disrespect for God and his word. And that's what he doesn't want. His intention is to help man, not bind him with heavy burdens. That day of rest, we get it from God because in 6 days he created the world. And on the seventh day he rested from all his work. And when these children, this Israel, were in bondage in Egypt, they had no day of rest. So can you imagine what a blessing that was? You're going to have a day of rest on that seventh day to rest from your works.
I guess that's kind of my point. The disciples weren't. Today, I feel like everybody feels it's a day of rest on the first day of the week.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think the disciples were resting on the first day of the week. I think that they were still working and evangelizing and doing as much as they could on the first day of the week as they were the second and third and fourth days of the week. What they were doing all the time, they just came together and did it together. I remember a Little House on the Prairie episode, and I guess this kind of sticks in my mind. I think Laura Ingalls was getting in trouble for going, and she had a neighbor in need or something like that, and she was getting in trouble with a lot of her neighbors because she was going, and I don't remember what she was doing, cleaning up the house or helping her, whatever. But the moral of that show was it was doing the Lord's work on the first day of the week.
Mm-hmm.
And so she felt like it had to be part of that, and I just feel like Christians still feel like the first day of the week should be set aside from all kinds of work. I just don't ever read that anywhere. I feel like we may extrapolate that from a couple different places.
That would be like me coming to church. The guy's laying in the road needing my help, but I drive around him so I can get here to worship service. That's not right, is it? I've not done what is right. That's kind of the point in it. You don't want to make this above helping a brother in need. That's the time he needs the help right now.
Can I point out, I'm not gonna go exactly opposite of what Jake said, because I can't do that, I don't believe that either. But I do want to put a shade of it on there. I think you brought this up because I said my mom told me not to work on Sunday.
I was already going with it though before that.
Okay, all right, well, good. The reason why I know my mom didn't want me to work on Sundays because she wanted me to go to church. And a lot of jobs will keep people from doing that.
Yeah.
And it'll hinder people from assembling with the saints, which, you know, it tells us to do that. That's not exactly the point of Hebrews 10:25 either, but the idea of going to church or assembling with the saints, or however you want to word that, is something that they did in the first century on the first day of the week for the purpose of worshiping God and encouraging one another. We can't say that we can just completely give that up, but we can't say that, I mean, when we get to the truth of some things, it's a little bit more complicated than just making a simple rule, which is what Adam and Eve did. Don't eat or touch the tree or you'll die. You know, that's a real simple rule. It's not one that we might like, but it's pretty simple. Sometimes the rules are not that simple, or sometimes it's really not a rule, it's a concept. The concept is for us to gather together, worship God, encourage one another, and be a blessing to as many of us as we possibly can. And when we interfere with that with other things, sometimes it hinders our faith so that we don't get the encouragement we need. It's kind of like eating food. We need it on a regular basis. And I know that we need to read the Bible every day. We need to study the Word of God as much as possible. But we can't think that that's the only thing we're going to do 24/7. Same thing with worship or whatever. It needs to be done. It's just sometimes we condemn someone because, well, their job forces them to work, and if they don't work on that day, at some point they might get fired, and then they don't have a job. Hope they just dropped something.
Sounded like a pop of something.
So it's a little bit complicated of a concept, but we have to include various things to get through that truth of the need to worship God.
And it's the design of the church is to well, just go to the end of this chapter, and it's said, you know, they said your mother and your brother are outside, they want to see you. And he says, well, who is my mother and my brother? In other words, well, let's ask it another way. Who is my family? Right, Stephen? It's those that do the will of my Father. So that he created the church to be a family, and we need to be a family that would make others want to be a part of that. And like Jake said, we should want to be together all the time, not just Sunday.
Exactly.
All the time. So
That's why we're here tonight.
that's why we're here tonight. Good point, Joe.
There's no command for a midweek meeting.
No. We want to come together and we want to sing some praises to God. We'd like to approach His throne in prayer together as a community of believers, family of believers, and it's important to us. So, good points, good comments from everybody. Let's read a few more verses here, and it's about the Sabbath day, and we'll continue on with that, and how, I guess, absurd that they were against Christ, the religious leaders of that time. Let's read verses 10 through 13, and we'll expound on those a little bit.
There he saw a man who had a paralyzed hand, and in order to accuse him, they asked him, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath?"
He said to them, if any of you has a sheep and it falls into the pit on the Sabbath, will you not take hold of it and lift it out?
How much then is a man better than a sheep? Wherefore it is lawful to do well on the Sabbath day.
Then saith he to the man, stretch forth thine hand. And he stretched it forth, and it was restored whole like as the other.
All right. The stage is set. Do you think Christ knew what he was doing on both of these accounts? He did, didn't he? He knew exactly. He knew exactly what he was doing.
Verse 8 says very strongly here, the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath.
Lord of the Sabbath.
In other words, I am the Lord of the Sabbath. Don't tell me what I can't do.
This, learn from me.
There is something to that.
Absolutely.
You can't tell me what to do.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we like to say that, but we don't usually expect Jesus or God to say something like that, but that's the truth.
We don't have the authority.
He's above us all.
And that's what this the synagogue and the worship there is the same today. The church, that's his kingdom. That's we do what's pleasing to him.
Not the building.
Not the building, but the church and the worship is for him and to him. We have an audience of one. But he sets the stage here for what's fixing to take place. There's a man there that had a withered hand, and they asked him, saying, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath days?" And they didn't want to see him, this man be healed. They didn't care nothing about him. It says that they might accuse him. Because I think they knew what he was going to do. They'd seen enough, knew enough about him. They knew what he was going to do. But he asked him a question first, didn't he? Is there which one here, if you had one of your sheep fell into a pit on the Sabbath day, which one of you wouldn't lay hold of it and pull it out? What was their answer?
They had no one.
They didn't give one, did it? They did. That's just Christ could just shut people up. You can't answer what he asked, because he knows their hearts. He knows their thoughts. The answer is redundant. They're gonna take their sheep and they're gonna get it out. They're not gonna lose that sheep. You can almost see them looking around, but they're gonna get the sheep out of the ditch or out of the pit.
I got to tell you about a TV show I was watching. I don't normally talk about them, but this guy was depicting a Jew, and this is modern day, and he was trying to practice his religion by not doing any work on the Sabbath. And he was standing there waiting for an elevator, and he was waiting and waiting. And somebody came up and he says, "Did you push a button?" He says, "No, it's a Sabbath." He couldn't even push the button to get on the elevator because it was the Sabbath day. And he was sincere about it. He was, and he says it's a problem, but I've got to deal with it. So the guy that was there with him pushed the button for him, and he got on the elevator.
Mhm.
And whenever he got off, whenever he got on the elevator with that guy, he pushed the button for him so that he could go up to the floor he was supposed to go up to, so he could get off of it.
Well, since you mentioned that, I wrote a few examples down here in my notes that I read of some of there's like 1,500 something the laws that they'd come up with.
Right.
And
Based on
not working.
on the Sabbath.
They'd added to
Right.
the law of Moses.
Traditional.
And some of them, they're just ridiculous. You can save a man's life, but you can't treat him if he's ill. It says you couldn't stretch out your hand and someone hand you something.
Can't comfort anybody.
So
He's hurt.
it said that during the Maccabean Revolution, there was 1,000 Jews that were slain because they wouldn't fight on the Sabbath. So,
That was the perfect day to fight with them, wasn't it?
you know, if your other generals find that out, you're going to be short-lived.
I'll just wait till the Sabbath to fight with him.
But anyway, it's silly, some of the things they come up with. But here's a good example that we're reading about right now. And he tells you, verse 12, you know, I'm not talking about sheep here. I'm talking about a man's life. How much more value is that? Because he knew their answer. You're going to save that sheep, and you're saying don't do anything for this man. It's silly. It's silly.
Remember, the first part of it says they were testing him.
Oh yeah, without a doubt. They're waiting so they can accuse him.
The last verse there says that they went up and because they were proven wrong, they went out and conspired against him to destroy him.
To destroy in verse 14. For what? Let's read about what he does in verse 13. He didn't really do anything here. He didn't lift up his hand. He just said, stretch forth your hand. And it's made whole. Now what work was done? He just spoke.
Right.
Which is what he always did. But it says, as Stephen mentioned there, Pharisees went out right after that and they held counsel against him, how they might destroy him. And I think we'll talk about that next week. We'll try to finish up the chapter.
Well, let me point out something real quick,
Okay.
and I'm not gonna make this drawn out. I just know that we can do the same thing that the Jews were doing there. We can do the same thing with the New Testament. People will look at those, they'll look at just about anything, but one thing that comes to my mind is the qualifications for an elder. They'll look at that. In particular, just for one quick example, is the children. They must be believing children for the elders. And so they look at that word. Well, it says children, so how many children does he have to have? Can it be one, or does he have to have two? You know, we start nitpicking at something, and we start making it into something that wasn't the intention of that.
Mm-hmm.
It was supposed to be this guy being a good father, and being the kind of example that he needs to be for the congregation. You know, so it's sacrifice, not mercy, is what it is.
It's a good point. And it's we do not want to be that way because we'll quench that spirit in a lot of people.
Right.
We can do that.
They'll make their own laws.
Yeah.
Right.
And you read, if you would read the rest of this chapter, because we're going to get down, and it's going to talk about the unforgivable sin. So study on that a little bit, and we'll read that next week. Thank you very much for your time and your attention tonight.